Welcome to the Lindsay Hadley Podcast Show, where weekly I interview some of the world's most inspiring people from business, philanthropy, and entertainment. I love collecting humans, and these are some of my favorites I found along the way. This podcast has been brought to us by Capita Financial Network.
Do you need help with the next steps of your financial plan? Think Capita. Capita is a financial network built around you. They have a team of financial advisors, CPAs, estate attorneys, Medicare providers, and Social Security experts to help you accomplish your financial goals. Call or schedule a complimentary consultation at 801-566-5058 or visit their website at capitafinancialnetwork.com. You can also check out their financial education podcast, The Financial Call, available on Apple, Google, Spotify, and YouTube.
Hi, welcome to the Lindsay Hadley Podcast Show. Today I have a new friend, somebody I'm just blown away reading his bio, Mr. David Hornik, who is one of the leading venture capitalists in the world. I mean, when I look at what he's accomplished, it's mind-blowing. His background is incredibly eclectic just from an educational perspective, you know, being able to tout some of the most impressive Ivy League schools. But I think more than anything, it was the quality of the different degrees of a BA at Stanford in computer music, which I'm dying to hear about. Yes. There's a criminology certificate from Cambridge, and then a JD from Harvard Law. I mean, if you couldn't be more of an achiever, I don't know what else you could be, David, but it's so exciting to talk to you today about your background, both with August Capital and your now new venture, which is Lobby Capital. And I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for being here.
No, thank you. You know, it's funny. I talk to students a lot. I teach now a ton. And I often talk with them about this idea, like there's a difference between, you know, kind of a golden resume and a fulfilling life. And I can remember very clearly along the way at some point when I kind of broke from I'm only trying to build the next great resume point, which isn't to say I did something crazy or terrible or, whatever. It was just that, you know, there are always paths where you could say, this is the thing that's the most celebrated, so you should do that thing. And you should, for sure, if it's the thing that makes you happy. But if it turns out that that's not the thing that makes you happy, you should probably do the thing that makes you happy, not the thing that looks best on your resume. And so I know that sounds disingenuous, having gone to all these places, but I do believe that.
No, I love it. Actually, this is a great segue to my first question. Your bio mentions you have 4 children and a puppy named Teddy, which may not be a puppy anymore, depending on its bio's written, and a wife named Pamela. You live in Palo Alto, and it talks a little bit about your philanthropic work. But I know for me, as somebody who is by no means has accomplished what you have, David, but just being a general person who has struggled with the addiction of external validation, and healing from that in my 40s, midlife crisis, trying to turn this crap around. You know, I think ultimately, the one thing that just grounds me and roots me more than anything is my cute dog, my beautiful children, my amazing husband, and then and nature, and then the quality, yummy humans in my life that are my best, most favorite people. And I just think it's so sweet because hearing somebody who has accomplished what you have is just so impressive. Why don't we start with that? Like, what is the things that get you up in the day, bring you the most joy, make you feel most, compassionate, most in tune, maybe spiritually aligned, whatever it may be?
Well, it's funny, I will say that for sure, children are grounding. My oldest is now 29, and he very much likes to tell me all the things I'm doing wrong. So,
yes, very humbling.
And it's like, okay, he's a very lovely young man, but it's funny. He just got engaged to his boyfriend of many years, who's super lovely, and I went to see the U.S. Open with his boyfriend, and his boyfriend said, listening to the two of you argue is like listening to Julian argue with himself. And I'm sure for my wife, it's like listening to me argue with Julian is like listening to me argue with myself. So it's a little, there's something very grounding about the fact that ultimately these little people, my guess is you have younger children than I, turn into, bigger people and then independent independent adults who have their own thoughts. And it is simultaneously fantastic and feels great and infuriating when they tell you you're an idiot.
Oh
So
my
it's,
gosh. I love it.
it's a mixed bag.
Well, I mean, I love your humility and being open to the fact that, hey, maybe I'm more like this person than I first maybe noticed. Tell me a little bit about your story, David. Like, what got you into venture capital? I mean, first of all, let's go back. Computer music, like, talk to me a little bit about that. Like, I don't think I've literally ever heard that term. Is this just show my ignorance here? I mean, I'm by the way, a music producer. I've never heard that term before.
That's because you're not old.
Okay, thanks.
So, look at my life has been a very lucky one. I grew up with parents who were extraordinarily supportive of kind of whatever I did. I was a dyslexic kid who, was kind of a challenge in some regards. And so my parents like, well, look at whatever engages him and supports him, we're gonna be excited about. Music was that thing for me in a lot of regards. And so so I got to pursue music, but my father was a computer scientist. We always had computers in the house. And so when in the 1980s, music became all about synthesizers, I became obsessed with synthesizers.
Wow.
And so, I end up convincing my teeny little school in New Hampshire that they needed to buy a synthesizer. I convinced the computer music lab to buy an interface that would allow you to connect the synthesizer to the computer. And then you could play stuff on the computer and basically it would be recorded, or play stuff on the keyboard. It would be recorded on the computer. It would play it back and then you could play something over it. It was just sort of an amazing technology at the time. We've come a billion miles further since then, but this was the early days. And I became just obsessed, thought it was an astonishing thing. And I had the very good luck of getting into Stanford. And Stanford had this place called CARMA, the Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics, which was their computer music lab. And the guy who ran it invented the synthesizer that really changed the sound of 80s pop music forever. And so I just started spending a bunch of time up there because it was amazing and fun and engaging. And eventually I was like, well, I've taken more classes in this than I've taken in anything else. So I invented my own degree in computer music. There was no such degree at the time. And it was amazing.
Incredible, David. So I love this. That's so like a blast from the past thinking about synthesized music and just thinking you being an advocate. Yeah. So from very young, you were a resourceful young man. You were like, hey, I need this thing I can't afford. Let me get the school to buy it so I can utilize the utility of this thing. That's so great. So, and then later into criminology and why such a big leap?
Yeah,
I guess.
So there's the shift. I mean, I was a kid who was, sort of an argumentative, I'm going to convince you of this thing. This is why I'm being punished by my own children. It's like, okay. And I always assumed I would be a lawyer. And I always assumed that I would be, a litigator of some sort. And so I thought, look, if I'm going to go to law school, I should practice criminal law. I should represent defendants, be a public defender, and try and make the planet a fairer planet. And so I went off. I thought I'll go to law school, so I should study criminology first to understand the nature of punishment and all of this stuff. And it was really just an opportunity to go hang out in London and hang out in Cambridge, England, and that was amazing. And then I went off to law school, and still thinking I was going to be a public defender. And I took this amazing course to learn how to be a public defender. We went off to this neighborhood in Boston called Roxbury, where we represented a bunch of folks who had been accused of various, mostly petty crimes. And I didn't like it. But, I thought it was important. I felt like the people who were doing the work were doing good work, and I wanted to be helpful to these folks, to a person. They had, had very challenging childhoods and lives that were leading up to the things they had done. But in the end, I was just not a good enough human to step out of myself and say, this is important. And so it doesn't matter with, that you are loving this and your clients in the process. And so I stepped away and said, you know what, I guess I'm not going to be a public defender.
You know what? I just want to challenge your language because you said I wasn't a good enough human. And I love that you're giving credit to those who do. But I do think each of us has a call in our lives, right? And I think on a spiritual level, like if it's not life-giving to you, you would just atrophy. You probably wouldn't be as good at it, even though you probably were very good because you're brilliant. You're just, when you don't love something and it doesn't fulfill you and it's not a virtuous cycle, it just doesn't generally edify. And so I think in the end, you made the right choice. And now you're able to give in all these other ways. So fast forward, you then go to law and you end up then in venture capital. What got you into that world?
Well, I was a litigator in New York for a little while. I was representing big corporations. It was super fun. I had amazing people who I worked with. They were astonishingly smart and engaged, but it wasn't that fulfilling in the grand scheme of things. And I moved back to Silicon Valley because it was the beginning of the internet era. And again, my dad had been a startup guy, had been a computer scientist. So I was like, well, I guess I'll go there. I'll start representing startups. And eventually I'll become an in-house counsel. I was balancing little kids at the time. I had a couple of little kids, ultimately 4. And so I thought this will be the better work-life balance. I'll represent companies. I'll find my way into a company. And it turned out that was 100% wrong. It turned out that I got back to the Bay Area. I started representing these little companies. I didn't really know much about startups or startup law. But the second I did, I realized, oh my goodness, these are these very smart, excited, engaged technologists who have thought of some way to solve a problem that someone hasn't thought of before, and they want to make the planet better in some regard through technology. And I'm their lawyer trying to help them raise money and hire people and engage in contracts and distribution, all these things. And it was so amazing to me. Like I just was, to your point, so energized. It was very clear that I had found the thing that was, unimaginably energizing and fun to me. And I thought that the people with whom I was working were terrific. Like They were all just, they were doing it for the right reasons. They were doing amazing stuff. And so I became 100% addicted. I worked harder than I'd ever worked. I stopped sleeping. I was working all night, in between being at home with little kids. And it was just amazing. And somewhere along the way, I met a lot of venture capitalists. I was kind of a loudmouth. And so I would say what I thought about the business, not just about the law. And one of those people, an incredible venture investor named Dave Marquardt, was in one of those board meetings. And after the board meeting said to me, David, have you ever thought about the venture capital business? And my answer was like, yes.
You had.
I'm very excited. It was a long set of conversations. And finally, after a bunch of months of him talking with people I'd worked with, et cetera, he and his partners said, you know what, this is a hard business. Lawyers are not the best at it in the world, but we really like you. And if you'd like to join us, then we'd be happy to see how you are as a venture investor. And I said, well, I can't think of anything I'd be more excited about. And I was at the time a member of the New York bar, the California bar, the Washington, D.C. bar.
Wow.
I withdrew from all of them and said, great, I'm an investor now. I'm not a lawyer. I burned the bridges and suddenly I was a VC. And that was 24 years ago. So it's, so far so good. We'll see how the next 24 go, but it's been a pretty amazing run.
David, tell me, how many funds now have you done? How many rounds?
Well, when I joined, the firm I joined was called August Capital. And when I joined, we were investing August 3. This was in June of 2000. We invested August 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 5 funds. And then when we finished investing August 7, my partner Eric and I said, look, do we want to raise August 8 or do we want to think differently about this? We decided to kind of change it up a little bit, rebrand the firm after this conference I had been running called The Lobby. And so after August 7, we raised Lobby 1. So that was my 6th fund. And we're currently raising Lobby 2. So that would be my 7th venture fund over 24 years.
Amazing. So David, I'm sure we've got a lot of listeners that have made bets in venture capital or do just private equities. They could do, sometimes they're early angel investors. What is it you look for? I know that's really complicated and you have probably a thesis in your fund, but what are the core kind of quadrant things that you look for that you're like, hey, these are the sweet spot of how I decide to bet and what I decide to invest in?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you this. I don't have a thesis. I genuinely do not believe that a thesis is a good idea, to tell you the truth. If VCs knew what the future would bring, they should go be founders, right? Look, would you rather be a VC or would you rather be Mark Zuckerberg? I don't know. I mean, maybe you'd rather be a VC, but it's a different business. My view is that I have a very specific view that is not shared some would say is not correct. And that is this. I think that the venture business is a relationship business. This is about building strong relationships with amazing humans. There are others who believe that the venture business is a transaction business, right? That it's about doing deals. Oh, I bought these shares and the shares are worth more now and I'm going to sell these shares. That's not how I do this business. My view of the venture business is that amazing humans in the right place at the right time, having thought about the things that they're excited about and the problems they're trying to solve, can on occasion come up with astonishing ideas where if they have the economic support and the support, the business support, et cetera, can build a transformative business. And I'm looking for those people. And I have the capital to help them, but lots of people have the capital. But I have the time and the engagement and the history, and at this point, some expertise to help them to understand what things will accelerate their business, how they will be able to create something transformative, big, and exciting. And every so often that happens, and when it does, it's complete magic. And the byproduct of that turns out to be a lot of money. And so that's good because my job is to turn money into more money. But the way I do it is to work with astonishing people who are trying to solve real problems.
I love when you talk about the people. So my mentor, this gentleman named Joe Ritchie, anybody listens to my podcast, I talk about him regularly. He was one of the greatest options trader ever. He was the greatest to date options trader who ever lived. At the peak of his career was trading at like $2 trillion a year. And after he sold his company, in fact, the federal government wouldn't let him sell it internationally to a Japanese private-owned company, even though it was a privately owned company, because it was like a federal threat because it was moving so much money. So he ended up selling it to Bank of America. It was called the Chicago Research and Trading Firm. And after he liquidated himself, he had access to some great analysts, obviously, and he decided to put his public portfolio together, and he decided to not do it based on any verticals, no thesis, not the trajectories of these businesses, nothing. He did it based on the character of the CEO, David. And so These are qualitative things that in clusters become quantitative, like how do they treat their spouse, what kind of corporate social responsibility, what kind of HR process do they have? Do they keep their word? Are they on time? Do they how do they treat the secretary? This is just like data points that they could come together. And then they found that like only about 1% of these 2,600 publicly traded companies had CEOs of character, quote unquote. And what's really cool is that
that's a little depressing, by the way. But
I know the 1%.
Not the point.
Right. The point. But what they found is that that when they bet on them, so it outperformed the S&P and the Dow by 30% over time. And anyway, it ended up just being like this really fun thing you hope to be true, that the good guys are the winners, And so I love what you said about the people. Do you at least pick a vertical? Are you SaaS? Are you,
no,
retail?
Here's what happened. I got very lucky when I entered the business. The partners with whom I joined forces had been investors in enterprise software businesses, consumer software businesses, chip companies, storage businesses. They had backed. And by the way, Dave Marquardt, who was the guy who said, "Hey, David, have you thought about the venture business?" He was the only private investor in Microsoft. He sat on that board for 33 years. He was the first investor in Seagate. He was the first investor in Sun and Compaq. So their view was you back amazing people who are doing interesting things and you don't worry about it. And so, I got lucky in that the very first set of companies I invested in, 3 of the 4 of them ended up being quite interesting businesses run by wonderful people, but in diverse areas. So the very first investment I made was in that 1% guy, a guy named Rene Lacerte, who was at Intuit at the time, and he wanted to build an online payroll business when no one was doing that. His business, PayCycle, was literally the very first small business SaaS business in 2000. And I did a bunch of work to get to know him because it was going to be my first investment. So I talked to everyone. And I remember having this conversation with Rene. I said to Rene, "Hey, I've done all this work. I've talked to everyone you know. And the only question I have is, are you too nice of a guy to be successful?" And his answer was essentially, "There's just no such thing." And I said, "Okay, good answer. I totally agree with that." And I gave him a term sheet. By the way, I was the 90-something VC he had pitched. So he had received 90 some odd no's. And I gave him this term sheet and funded this company.
Wow.
The company was founded 25 years ago. I yesterday got an invitation to a party for the 25th anniversary of PayCycle. So Rene built this thing. I suddenly am now a financial services investor. He sold it. We sold it to Intuit, and he started another company.
By the way, it obviously won, but did it win big? Did he win big?
No, the first one did fine.
Okay,
we sold it for a couple $100 million. We made
that's
some
pretty
money.
Good. That's pretty good.
It was fine. It wasn't huge. But his next company, Bill.com, which I also funded and still sit on the board of, when I funded it, it's a payments platform for small businesses. How do you pay your bills? How do you pay contractors, et cetera? And when I funded it, it was moving about $10,000 a month.
Wow.
Right? It was nothing. It was paying $10,000 a month.
Wow.
Today, it is moving $1 trillion a year.
Oh my goodness.
It is 1% of American GDP that Bill.com moves. So, when I funded it, it was $2 in revenue. It now exceeds $1 billion. Right? Yeah. It's just amazing that this is possible. And the reason I funded it was because I thought that Rene was amazing. I funded his first company. It was fine. And I funded his second company because I'm like, you got more in you. And boy, did he. And that was amazing. So, all right, I'll be slightly faster on this. I funded a fintech company. The next company I funded was a company called Ebates. And Ebates was in the consumer space. It was an online shopping mall where you got rebates. And we ended up the biggest shareholders in that company, owned a quarter of it when we sold it to Rakuten for $1 billion. So made $250 million. That was a great outcome. The third company I funded was in the enterprise application space. And it was a total failure, and we lost $10 million. And, it was an interesting learning experience. And then the last company I funded with 3 really smart people, the last of the first 4, with 3 really smart people who had an idea on how to build an infrastructure software to help people better understand how to debug their systems, how to understand what kind of security problems there were. And when I funded it, it was a company called Transaction Engines. And after the very first board meeting, I believe, we renamed the company Splunk. And Splunk went on to become a public company and to become a big business. And almost 20 years to the day I funded it, Cisco bought it for $30 billion.
Unbelievable.
And so suddenly I was a fintech investor, a consumer business investor, a vertical application investor, and an infrastructure investor.
Total diversity.
And I've done all of those things for the last 24 years.
Amazing. So how early of a stage was when Renee's first company was doing 10,000 a month, you said, or the second company?
It was, that was his second company, 10 people very early. Like all these companies I funded, Splunk when it was 3 people and an idea.
Wow.
I think that
Is it considered angel round that you came in?
Well, it was pretty early for us because we were typically Series A investors. So Renee Lassert's company, Bill.com, was the Series A. They had raised money before and they had built and gotten to some product market fit. In Splunk, it really was a seed investment. We treated it like a Series A, but it was quite early.
So David, what if there's a company out there, like I'm actually thinking of one that I've invested in, that the product is amazing. Like it's an amazing product. It's a nanoparticleized, micropulverized foliar spray that's rejuvenative. It's like the future of ag. It's just incredible. Okay. So they take, NPK and 78 other trace minerals that are in this dirt that's been like pre-chelated and has this diatomaceous earth, and they turn it into finer than smoke dust, like finer than, like, I don't even know, 3 microns or something, just absolutely obliterate it. And then they put it into water and put it all over anything, any plant, household, whatever. And it is, the research, I've seen all the research, like this thing is legit. It's the real deal. It's doing things they've never seen plants do. It makes sense. It's like an IV for plants. The availability is instant. The reason I'm sharing all this is like, so, full disclosure, like the leadership team, they're great people, but they're not operators. They're inventors. They're tinkerers. Right. They invented they came up, they're scientists. What do you do when you and I just came in really early because there's relationship there, family relationship, and I believe in what they're doing. How can you help companies like that? And do you guys come in and you see these things? Is that common where you'll go, this is a brilliant scientist or a brilliant idea, and it just needs the right operators? And like, how do you find them? And how do you see venture having a role there? They just kind of like, generally when I think of venture, I think Series A, come in when it's already proven and just scale. And oftentimes they can even cannibalize what was working, and they're kind of bad guys in the room. You know what I mean? How can you speak to that?
Yeah, that's not my world. My world is definitely a team building world.
Yeah.
Like one of the things I like to do the most, one of the things that I think I bring to lots of companies is to help them to scale and build teams, right?
Yeah.
And so it is rare that we would invest in a company where there isn't someone in the room who we already believe is a very good business-focused entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Because it's not clear what you're betting on. We don't bet on products. We don't bet on,
that makes sense.
Those sorts of things. We bet on people who are solving problems, right? My partner, Buddy, who came and joined, my partner, Eric, and I were at August 7, and then we had this guy, Buddy Arnheim, join us for Lobby One, and Buddy and I had been attorneys working together 25 years earlier. And Buddy had this experience where he had been asked by a friend to look at a technology that was being built. And he reported back to this investor, this technology is astonishing. This is before he joined us at Lobby. He said the technology is astonishing, but he needs a business partner if he's going to make it successful. And his friend, who was the capital that was going to help fund it, said, great, so go do that. And Buddy said, well, that's not what I do. I do these other things. And his friend said, yeah, that's great. Now go do it. And Buddy had the wisdom to say, all right, great. And he partnered with this astonishing technologist, and they built a solar powered satellite company that really transformed the technology space. And ultimately, he helped raise money, helped bring in a CEO, and then he helped sell it to Google sometime later to be part of their kind of Loon project. And so he has been that person, but because he's been that person, he knows it's not our job. Like our job is to back that person, help them to build something big and interesting, help them scale. And I wish it was so simple that you kind of come in and you're like, okay, great, grow this thing, But most of the time there are lots of twists and turns. You think it's going to work. It's, like even Splunk, which was this astonishing trip. We recruited in an amazing CEO named Godfrey Sullivan. And when Godfrey got there, he said, we're going to run out of money. And he did a layoff. And yet you think of the history of Splunk as nothing but up and to the right. So
right.
There are lots of things that venture investors do to try and help you be successful. and but you need someone to be at the heart of it who's going to be leading the charge, or we won't fund you.
That makes so much sense and so helpful. So, David, having had all the success, you mentioned that, like, hey, now I have more than I need for my needs. You mentioned that other than buying beautiful art, which I'm thrilled that you love. What is it that you're doing in a philanthropic or give back sense? Tell us a little bit about your passions there. I think a lot of our listeners are in that phase where they've made it, and now they're deciding what's the second act, or like how do we deploy this capital in a meaningful way that blesses those around us because we have more than we need.
Yeah, I mean, look I was a young person working 20 hours a day for a lot of years, and as I was kind of emerging from that phase, I was still working 19 hours a day. But I said to my wife, look, we've been very lucky. And along the way, I've really established a bunch of expertise in governance and board building and team building, whatever else. And I'm only bringing it to bear on private businesses. I'm not doing anything in the philanthropic space. And it's probably time to be thoughtful about that. She and I had a long conversation, and we decided that we were concerned about LGBTQ rights and viewed it as the modern civil rights, challenge of our day. And so we did some work and did some research, and ultimately I decided that I would work with this incredible organization called GLAAD. And have been fortunate enough to sit on the GLAAD board for more than a decade. And GLAAD's kind of the leading LGBTQ advocacy organization in the country. And so we're working to try and make the country, for sure, a safer, more embracing, more safe and loving place for LGBTQ kids. And that's been a good use of my time. It's been a good use of capital to try and make sure that happens. The other thing that my wife and I have become obsessed with is art. And not because, there are lots of people who embrace art because it's a trophy, or it's a sign of opulence, or all these things. And it is those things, and it's stupid. We love art because it's very emotional to us. It makes us think and feel in ways that are important. And we collect art that reflects the broader world we'd like to see. And my wife has for now 15 years sat at the front desk of Stanford's Cantor Art Center as groups of students come in and get to experience art and see how it impacts her. She's probably the only person I know who's both sits at the front desk and is on the board
That's
of an organization. And so we've gotten to see how impactful art is. And so we're doing a lot of things to support artists, to give amazing art to institutions, to support, to share that broader view of the world. So I sit on the board of the Smithsonian American Art Museum. My wife sits on the board of Stanford's two museums. We collectively, Pamela and I, helped to start a museum in San Francisco called the Institute of Contemporary Art San Francisco, and that's been extraordinary. So in a lot of ways, these things feel a little bit like you're being a dilettante, but our goal is to just make the planet a little safer, a little happier, a little better mostly for kids.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I love your heart. I love that you care about art. I'm really passionate. I've shared that passion in filmmaking, and I'm spending a lot of my philanthropic time. I've started the first ever venture capital shaped 501c3 film fund for feature and television. So it's an evergreen fund. So there's no LPs, but the donors give to the fund based on a project they're excited about, and they become executive producer or whatever. And then the fund takes equity in these film properties, and then there's a return. It comes back to the fund and be a gift that keeps on giving. And
that's amazing. By the way, I have the perfect film for you that I'm an investor in.
Tell me about it.
I'm an investor in it because, again, I love theater. And so I somehow got lucky and got introduced to some interesting theater productions, in Broadway. And I ended up being a producer, just junior
Cool.
investor in a bunch of great shows. Shows like A Strange Loop, which is just a fascinating show, or Kimberly Akimbo, which is just a lovely show, or
Cool.
a bunch of, and both of those won the Tony for best
Oh, well,
musical.
there you go. Just won some Tonys.
And but there's a documentary film being made right now about this incredible production of the musical Godspell. So the guy who wrote Wicked, this guy Stephen Schwartz, who's one of the great musical composers of all time.
Yes.
When he was in college, wrote this musical Godspell. And I'm not sure if it was the first production, but it was sort of the first big production happened in Toronto. And the cast was a bunch of young up-and-comers. And those young up-and-comers were the whole Second City troupe. It was Eugene Levy and and Martin Short and Gilda Radner.
Those guys, those are legends.
It was just like the most epic cast ever there. And so it's this famed production, and they're doing a documentary, and they've interviewed all of these folks. Paul Schaefer was the musical director. It's just like this, and it's just a feel-good story because it was just a bunch of young folks at the very front end of their careers who loved each other and came together to create this, just this magical experience. And so we're making a documentary about that experience, and it's just going to be an incredibly fun documentary.
That's amazing. David, is this your foray into filmmaking? This is your first project you've done?
Is it? My wife has funded a couple of films about the art world with a really wonderful friend of hers that have explored the contemporary art world and the challenges of the contemporary art world, et cetera. And those have been fun. Again, I think I do these things because I think that they should get made, not because I think I'm not trying to make money at it. I've invested in 8 shows on Broadway, and they've won lots of great awards, and I'm kind of break even.
Yeah, which is amazing because you can go do it again, which is kind of the premise of our fund. Is like, even if we just break even, we can keep perpetuating this beautiful art and storytelling and enable creativity and like you said, make the world a little brighter. I love it, David. So that's really compelling. So in your experience, have you found that when you're in the venture capital world, what stage do you find that there's a generous heart at a certain point, or is there a focus on building, or is there a point where you see in your industry there's an appetite that gets satiated and they go, now I want to give? Do you notice that? Because I just had a call earlier with my friend who's a very successful, venture capitalist, and he was just saying that I just got to get one more. He kind of wants to have a big win and then do, and I've always, my whole life, I've been like, I like giving as I go because it's so addicting. It's actually quite selfish. Like, I give because it feels so good to give. And I love serving because it makes me feel my life have meaning and purpose. Like, so the idea of like, just being on the rat race, amassing a big fortune has never been as of interest to me as it is to actually deploy whatever resource I have now to share and give, because I just get such a dopamine hit from it all. So I'm curious, what do you find?
Yeah.
Is it maybe a correlation with the patience that a venture capitalist has, that they're waiting 10 years for their portfolio to exit? What do you think that is?
I mean, I just think that there are people who think that giving is important and it gives them joy, and there are people who think that accumulating wealth is what gives them joy. And so everybody gets to live their life however they see fit. I have partners who, when we have great outcomes, are thrilled to, pile it up in a big stack.
Yes.
And then I and others of my partners think, well, you know what? We have a lot of money. It's not, this is a perfectly great job.
Yeah.
And so what can we do to help support the planet? And, it's funny, one of my partners said to me at one point along the way, he said, David, I don't quite understand you. I've never have met someone who works harder than you do, and then when you make money, you give it away. He said, like, why is that? Like, he just thought, he said that seems
crazy.
mystifying.
Yeah.
Right? Mystifying to me. And I said, because that's what brings me joy, right? That's why I work so hard is I want, I'm also a competitive person. I want to be successful. I want to fund amazing companies, but when the outcome is a bunch of capital. And so he said, well, that's interesting. And he was an accumulator. He was accumulating a bunch of money. And I was recently talking with him, and he just gave a lot of money to medical research. He said, David, I was thinking about it, and I have a bunch of money, and I was talking to these researchers who are working on something very important, and I just decided I should give them a bunch of money. And I was like, well, there you go. I said, how did it feel? And he said it was amazing.
Oh, wow.
I said, well, yeah, good. Then great.
That's so, I love your answer. Well, I do it because it's what I want to be doing.
Yeah.
I love that a lot. Well, David, what are you most looking forward to kind of coming up on the horizon? Like of all the things that you're involved in and participating in this new fund, your family life, like where you are in this season, what's lighting your heart up today?
I mean, this is what's amazing about this job and this life is there's so many things, right? My son's engaged, like it's going to be the first wedding of a kid. And I have to tell you, having kids who are happy and find the people that they love and who love them is amazing. So that's amazing. I'm excited and ready to bring this new fund together and keep investing in amazing companies. That's incredible. The business is interesting, right? I funded this little teeny company called MaintainX because I had met the founder at another company I had funded. And every time I went to that company's board meeting, I'd stop and chat with him because I just thought he was such a smart, lovely guy.
Good.
And interestingly, that company he was working at failed and went out of business, and we lost all our money. But I said to him, look at you're awesome. Let me know how I can be helpful to you. And eventually he started this company, MaintainX. And I was like, oh, that's exciting. It's like thinking about how you can help organizations to maintain their McDonald's or their restaurant or their concrete manufacturing plant. So it's another one. I funded it when it was $7,000 in revenue or something.
Wow.
And I've worked with him for a bunch of years now. The company now is tens of millions in revenue, is solving the problems for thousands of organizations. And I love this guy so much. He's just had 3 little kids, and he's living his best life. And he's just I was recently at a board meeting in his office, and we did a fireside chat, and one of the employees asked me, like, why did you fund this company? What are you excited about? And by the way, this founder is like a very big guy. He's 6'2" or 4", big, and I said, I funded your company because Chris is a teddy bear and I love him. And I got out of my seat and I gave him this big hug. And I said, like, I'm so excited to see you all win. And
I love that.
It is amazing. Like when the good folks win, they're building something of value. There's nothing more fun.
No,
there are a lot of companies like that. MaintainX is just one of them where I get to keep working with them. And, so they're just there's so many things that my youngest is going to graduate from college, and I'll have no more kids in college. That's kind of epic.
That's epic.
The world marches forward, and it's a pretty lucky place to be.
You have the most beautiful energy and heart, David. I'm so glad I got to meet you. And I just want to thank you profusely for coming on the show and sharing some of your wisdom and insights about betting and investing and life and art and love. Thank you so much for coming on, David. We really appreciate you.
Oh, this was so fun. Thank you.
Do you need help with the next steps for your financial plan? Think Capita. Capita is a financial network built around you. They have a team of financial advisors, CPAs, estate attorneys, Medicare providers, and Social Security experts to help you accomplish your financial goals. Call to schedule a complimentary consultation at 801-566-5058 or visit their website at www.capitafinancialnetwork.com. You can also check out their financial education podcast, The Financial Call, available on Apple, Google, Spotify, and YouTube.